guys, it's Miss Harrington here. We are here at the Bogue Sound. This is part of the Albemarle Pamlico National Estuary. So an estuary is where the fresh water meets the salt water of the sea. So back over here you can see the mainland, and that's where the fresh water is coming from. And then on the other side of the island, which you can't really see, is where the salt water is coming from. And so they meet together in this protected area, and that makes a really unique ecosystem.
Estuaries form over time. They're very ephemeral geologically, so that means that they come and they go. And they start out forming when river delta deposits sediment, and you can watch that video about why do rivers have deltas and how do deltas form in the other videos that I have linked for you. So you can kind of see in this picture here that there's a continuum of different types of estuaries. So over time, all estuaries will kind of start out as one thing and then eventually form into another, and then it can go back and forth along this continuum. So lagoons are sometimes created by wave action, so the waves will hit the shore and kind of create this little indentation area, and then eventually the sediment will wash away, but then sediment from downstream gets deposited here with river deltas when the sediment slows, creating a deltaic estuary. And so these shifts can happen due to natural processes and human processes. So for instance, if like a dam got put upstream that prevented sediment from coming downstream and being deposited in the delta, then you might kind of go backwards in the scheme of how estuaries are formed. So there's several different types of estuaries. We're only going to focus on a couple of them. We're going to focus on coastal plain estuaries for the most part, because that's what we have on the North Carolina coast. The first type is lagoons. Lagoons are protected by some sort of parallel bar of land to the water, to the coast, and they're usually pretty shallow and they're not drained well. And then there's fjords and fjords, which are very steep valleys that were scoured away by glaciers, and they have very, very deep water. So in the interior, they can have water as deep as 800 meters, and usually they're formed along a tectonic plate boundary where subduction is happening. And fjords are deeper than fjords. And then you can have tectonically caused estuaries like the San Francisco Bay, which is also formed by plate tectonic activity that results in some sort of a depression. And they vary a lot, and they share a lot of characteristics with other estuaries. Yeah, and we don't have any around here in North Carolina. So we're going to be mostly talking about coastal plain estuaries, which are characterized by rivers within the estuaries and also having lots of floodplains. They're very shallow and they're dominated by water flow processes, which we'll talk about in a little bit. And in particular, we have a lot of salt marshes here in North Carolina. That means that these areas have rooted vegetation in the intertidal area that is flooded by tides and drained by tides during the day. In the salt marshes, the grass is the dominant vegetation. So this is technically part of both the estuary system as well as the intertidal zone. So you can kind of look in North Carolina. So this is the part of North Carolina that sticks out the most over here. Beaufort, North Carolina is right in here, and this is where like Emerald Isle is down this direction, and Atlantic Beach is here if you guys are familiar with the coast at all. But you can see in here in between the barrier islands and the coast these really shallow water areas that have a lot of vegetation in them and that have these river-like channels going through it. So those are our coastal plain salt marshes. And then another type of estuary that's very similar are deltaic estuaries. Oops, I forgot to change the font there. And so these are characterized by major river systems and this is the Mississippi River Delta. So the Mississippi River carries sediment down and then deposits it along its path out here and creates new land as it goes, which are all, and then this land in here is considered an estuary. In estuaries, we talk about gradients like we do in all aquatic ecosystems, well, in all ecosystems in general. So just as a reminder, a gradient is a increase or decrease in magnitude of a property. So it could be like temperature or pressure or concentration observed in passing from one point to another. So usually we're talking about abiotic factors when we're talking about gradients. So there are lots of physical gradients or abiotic factors that create gradients in estuaries. And again, just as a reminder, when we pair that with competition and biotic factors, then that creates the zones. And the different abiotic factors that we're looking at in estuaries include nutrients, salinity, water column depth, temperature, sediment size. But right now we're going to focus mostly on salinity and water column depth, which kind of create some other gradients like light gradients. We're going to talk about salinity gradients. So salinity gradient is determined by the proximity to the ocean, seasonal fluctuations, storm events, and also tides. And so this is a picture of the Chesapeake Bay and different salinities within the Chesapeake Bay. Over here is the mouth of the Chesapeake Bay, which opens up to the Atlantic Ocean, and you can see that the salinity levels are really high here. And then up towards the headwaters of the rivers, you can see that the salinity gets really low because the river is providing most of the water there, and here at the mouth of the estuary, the ocean is providing most of the water there. So just to look at seasonal salinity, so back to North Carolina, this picture on the left is a picture of the spring and winter, and you can see that it has lower salinity throughout. Up here, the red is the lowest salinity levels that we see here, and then over here on the right is the summer and fall, and you have higher salinity levels there. And so this has to do with a combination of rain patterns and also evaporation due to temperature. Another thing that determines salinity in estuaries is the circulation, and we're going to focus on tidal circulation in particular. So just as a review for some of you and a quick catch up for others, tides are caused by gravitational interactions between the sun, the moon, and the earth. And as we talked about in the intertidal zone, tides play a very important role in the life cycle of many marine organisms. So it's a periodic rise and fall of a body of water, and it's caused by the gravitational pull of the sun and the moon, but more the moon, pulling the water on Earth towards the moon, and it creates this little bulge here. And then the gravitational pull of the moon and the Earth also pulls the Earth a little bit, and so you end up with a bulge of water here, but also a bulge of water behind where the Earth kind of got pulled out of that area. And then we have tides when different parts of the Earth rotate around in and out of that bulge of water. So if an area rotates into the bulge of water, then it's a high tide, and out it would be a low tide. There's another video that explains this. Another gradient that determines where organisms can be is water column depth. So light can only penetrate so far in water, so the wavelengths are absorbed. And so as you go deeper down, different wavelengths of light stop being transmitted down into the water that far. So you can see like yellow light doesn't even go 10 meters down. Red colors stop being transmitted at a very shallow depth. Whereas blue light is transmitted fairly deep. And so that will determine whether or not plants can grow there and photosynthesize. So just as an example, we're going to look at some submerged aquatic vegetation. So these are grasses that grow to the surface of the water, but then they don't emerge from the surface of the water. So they're completely underwater, and they have different salinity tolerances. So these three grasses over here have 2 times the tolerance to salinity that many other grasses do. So they can be out closer to the marine influence, and also in areas where they might be more evaporation to cause higher salinity. So from a combination of salinity and depth of water, which determines the light that can reach the seagrasses or the submerged aquatic vegetation, then that determines the distribution of these seagrasses in the Chesapeake Bay.